Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I interview Stephen P. Williams, the author of The Blockchain, the Next Everything. You might have heard the blockchain, you might have heard of cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin. Well, they're all kind of related, and yet there's a lot of mystery about them. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of things that people don't know about them. So I want to interview an expert who knows a lot about the topic, and that's Stephen Williams, who just came out with his new book called Blockchain, the Next Everything. We talk a lot about not just Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but how can the actual technology be used on a practical level? What are some of the problems that it really solves? This is a topic that I find fascinating because I do believe some of the hype that it will in fact have some devastating consequences, some real big game changers in various industries, but not everything. And some of it is certainly overhyped. So we get into some of the ins and outs of this fascinating technology called blockchain. I wanted to start off with just a simple question because a lot of people may not have any idea like what is a blockchain. So if you're in an elevator in New York, long elevator, where you're going up to the top of the World Trade Center, and you have a chance to answer a simple question, which is, what is blockchain? What would you say? Well,
I would say that blockchain is a way of storing information that's secure. And the reason that it's secure is because it's distributed on the computers or devices of everyone who is attached to that chain.
Okay, and that's different than a traditional database, let's say an Oracle database, so the stuff that runs banks, and they don't necessarily they do have duplicate copies though, right? I mean, in other words, Bank of America or Citibank or the airlines, they have databases that have multiple copies, don't they?
Well, I would hope that they would, have multiple copies and back up their information, and I'm sure they do. But with the distributed system, everyone who participates in the chain has the opportunity to have an equal say in what happens on that chain, and also to keep track of all the information on that chain.
Could you say that the blockchains that private companies, let's say an airline, has is just a private blockchain, in other words, their database, or is it fundamentally a different technology than a simple database or a relational or SQL database, or databases that we've been using for decades now?
Yeah, the enterprise blockchains are interesting because they are closed. You have to be invited to join them. But they also allow access to information in a way that the traditional databases don't. So, and it really depends on how the company is using it. But they give the opportunity, especially like on a supply chain, for the people who are considered at the lower end of the chain, the initial producers of materials, to participate and see what happens to that material along the chain. And I think that probably isn't happening yet so robustly, but I think in the future it's going to give the palm oil producer, small-scale palm oil producer, the opportunity to actually contribute creatively to how that oil is marketed or used in the United States. They would also see what the price of their product is, how it goes up along the chain, which I think could have a big influence in the future.
Why did you write Blockchain, the Next Everything, the book that just came out in 2019 here?
Well, I've been a writer all my life, and also very interested in business as a way of affecting social change, especially for carbon reduction and having to do with climate change. And I went back to get my MBA in sustainability when I was 57 years old a couple of years ago. And in one of my first classes, I heard the word blockchain. I didn't know what it was. And I started looking into it, and I was completely captivated by it, which happens to some people. I don't know why. It's a curse or a blessing.
There's even an expression about it. It's like going down the rabbit hole. We all use it.
Yeah, I went way down the rabbit hole, and I am still there. And so I became fascinated by the potential for all kinds of things, including ethical sourcing, efficiency, egalitarian distribution of power, the use of financial, the ability to broadcast financial instruments to people who aren't currently banked, especially in developing countries. It just seemed like an endless possibility. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that almost everything I read, without exception, was pretty dull and pretty intimidating. And so I'm used to reading stuff like that as a journalist, and it's kind of my specialty is to take challenging information and make it for a general audience. So after I had studied this for a couple of years, I decided that I would write a book that I thought was very much needed, which would let people experience blockchain rather than just read a textbook about blockchain. So I wrote a book that's full of narrative, full of stories, and full of anecdotes that I hope will help people understand the potential of blockchain.
You're the perfect person there for me to ask this question. It's been nagging me for a long time about Bitcoin. So, you study sustainability, and I am curious about the whole topic as well. And one thing that I've read over and over again, and I don't know if at this point it's a myth or not, is that one transaction of Bitcoin will consume the same amount of energy that 30 American households use in a day, or something like. I believe that was the number. Have you heard the statistic?
I've heard so many different statistics that it's disturbing to me the amount, how information flies around that is unsubstantiated or created maybe with bad information. It is true that Bitcoin uses inordinate amounts of energy, and it's a real problem. But someone asked me the other day, they said that they had heard that Bitcoin right now uses more electricity than the entire world combined uses. Okay,
well, we know that's true. That's not true. We know that's
right. True. So that showed me that it's definitely something that needs to be worked out. So
sorry to interrupt, but there was one place I heard that it was it's getting close to, I think it's either Denmark or the Netherlands, somewhere around one of those countries nearby there. It's getting close to that level of electricity usage.
Yes, and I think that is the one figure that I think is probably most close to accurate. Mm-hmm. But there are a few caveats with talking about Bitcoin and electricity, and I want to start by saying I don't own any Bitcoin. And that's because of this problem. I don't find it ethical. But
and one more thing, just to also clarify, is that a lot of people don't realize that blockchain, which is what the subject of your book is, Bitcoin is just one manifestation of hundreds of different possibilities of blockchain.
Yeah, right. Blockchain was created to support Bitcoin, but blockchain has many, many other uses.
Right.
So, but
it's kind of like it's kind of like saying that I don't know, Yahoo.com is the internet. It's just one manifestation of the internet. Right.
It's one application built on top of it. So there's a couple of thoughts I have about Bitcoin and electricity. The higher the price of Bitcoin, the more competition there is to so-called mine Bitcoins, create Bitcoins out of thin air, basically. And that's done by running a lot of computers. And so people have made consortiums of computers, but they're situated generally not in the middle of, say, Utah, where they have to use electricity from a coal-fired power plant. Most of them are in China, and most of them are next to renewable resources because the electricity is cheaper, such as hydro plants are very popular. They're also located in cooler countries so that there's not as much cooling charge. But they still use it. You have to sort of look at where the source of the electricity is in order to gauge the depth of the problem. But the other thing that I find really interesting is a lot of cryptocurrency people believe that Bitcoin, Ether, and other types of coins will become the currencies of the world in the future, will replace the US dollar, the euro, and other currencies. Now, if that were to happen, all the trading of Bitcoin is done electronically through your computers or phones or whatever, and there would be no more need for ATMs, banks, etc. And imagine the amount of electricity that banks use in our day-to-day lives. I mean, look around. There are banks everywhere, and people are driving to banks. Bank executives are flying around the world, and I think anytime with sustainability, anytime you look at a system it's hard to just isolate one aspect of it, and you have to look at the effects of the whole thing. So while I am concerned about Bitcoin and electricity usage, I'm not. I don't buy all these figures.
Okay. Getting back to that one transaction, how much one transaction of Bitcoin consumes. What confused me about that thing, assuming the statistic was right, and again, I know you're kind of questioning whether it is even right, is that let's say it consumes the 30 households. When I do actually own Bitcoin, full disclosure, and a few other cryptocurrencies, by the way. I think 4 other different cryptocurrencies, but most of it's Bitcoin. I think 80% or so of what I have is in Bitcoin. And when I make a transaction, when I purchase Bitcoin or send Bitcoin, the fee that they charge me is pennies. Right. I mean, it's really not that expensive. I mean, at the height of the bubble in 2017, I think it was in January, whatever it was, they charged, I think, $50 per transaction. That was a crazy, because there just wasn't as much supply of miners out there to do it, and so the rate went up. But on most of the life of Bitcoin, it's pennies, most $1 that they're going to charge you. And so that's what just made me doubt that statistic about it consuming 30 households worth of energy in a day, one transaction. So if I send you $1, Stephen, supposedly it consumes 30 households worth of energy. Then how could they only charge me 80 cents
$1
to send you, or whatever? Do you see what I mean?
So you also have to factor into that when that transaction is put into a block, maybe 2,000 transactions are put into that block, and when that block is closed, the person using the electricity doing the mining receives a quantity of bitcoins, a number which has changed over time, but that's where the value is for the miner, really, is in that. And at the peak of the Bitcoin bubble, I think closing one block would earn you almost $250,000 worth of Bitcoin. So there was that whole value. But an interesting thing is, like, other methods are being created to secure these coins, to make a consensus around the transactions. And some of those are being done by Ether and by other companies. And one is one that is just where people are rewarded with fees. Another is that there are people who will put up a certain amount of money to show that they're the ones who get to close the transaction. There are all sorts of new methods being developed.
Right.
Also, at some point, there are only, I think, 21 million bitcoins programmed into the system. So when those are all so-called mined, Bitcoin will just go to a fee-based system, and we don't really know what that will be, but the use of electricity will drop significantly at that point.
Yeah, but that's way out in 2140.
Yeah, it's a ways down. Yeah.
By then we'll have fusion power.
Yeah.
So speaking of the different methods, my understanding is that you have basically 2 fundamental popular methods. One is proof of work, which is what Bitcoin uses, and Monero and many other cryptocurrencies. And then there's proof of stake, which is what Ethereum wants to use. It's trying to get there, but it hasn't got there yet as of middle of 2019.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's true.
Do you now? From my understanding is that people say, well, okay, proof of work, yes, it consumes far more energy. I think proof of stake has been said takes 1% of the energy that a proof of work algorithm requires. But say the defenders of proof of work, they say that, okay, yes, it consumes much more energy, but it's far more secure. What do you think?
Right. I think it is more solidly secure at this point. But I do
proof
think
of work.
that, proof of work. But I also think that the people working with Ethereum and developing the alternatives are very smart and are moving to the future. I mean, our society is, in the U.S. at least, is completely polarized now around almost every issue, and that extends to the cryptocurrency world. And the Bitcoin, they call themselves Bitcoin maximalists, will stick by Bitcoin come hell or high water, and always find a reason to put down Ether. So I honestly have a lot of faith in the minds at that are working on Ethereum right now. Mm-hmm. And I believe that they have a variety of different methods that they're pursuing, and I think it will work out.
When we talk about other blockchains outside of cryptocurrencies, what method are they using? They're not using proof of work. They're not using or are they using proof of stake? What is the popular methodology of sharing their database of a public database?
So. With public databases, I think they're generally using either proof of work or proof of stake, and the IBM is doing a lot of work with enterprise blockchains, and they don't have the same issue because they have their built-in trust. The proof of stake and proof of work are what allows you to trust the validity of the information that's stored on the chain. And if you're working with an enterprise blockchain, you don't have that exact same problem because it's controlled within a system.
Okay, because they assign you as being one of the authorities. They just say by fiat, right. Bam.
So in a way, it's a centralized distributed system. If that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah, I understand. So that's the rub. So let's dive into a little bit about the different ways that we could be using blockchain and how it could affect, because in some ways you got to wonder whether blockchain is going to be just another one of these technologies like flying cars, the thing that just never actually happens.
You don't have one?
Well, it's called a helicopter, I suppose. I guess we do. Right. But basically, we don't have. We've been talking about flying cars forever. We've been talking about VR, virtual reality, forever, and it never really seems to truly catch on and become completely mainstream. And so, my question is, Stephen, do you think, as an author of a book about blockchain, do you think blockchain is also going to be potentially one of these overhyped technologies that just never seems to see the light of day, or is maybe 30, 40 years off when we keep thinking it's around the corner?
That's a great question because, again, talking about that polarization, there are a lot of people who seem to have a lot at stake in promoting the idea that blockchain is a basically totally hype and a worthless technology, and they populate Twitter in a heavy way, and I'm exposed to them on Medium and different articles. I feel that nobody knows yet how blockchain is going to play out, and I'm not going to say that it will completely transform the world or transform all industries, but I certainly think that we need to give it a chance and try to, I think a lot of the people who are opposed to blockchain, first of all, expect it to be working perfectly right now with a high rate of transactions and ease of use and great user interfaces, but that's kind of a big request for a fairly new, very complex technology, and I think we need to give it time. And people, one thing I see now that I think is a problem is that there are a lot of people who try to take blockchain technology and distributed ledgers and make them fit into their current way of doing business, rather than looking at blockchain and distributed technologies as perhaps a new paradigm, a new way of looking at business and society and the organization of value, and trying to invent new ways of doing business, new ways of running governments, and new ways of communicating. And that's the direction that I'm going in. And I do think that when you try to fit a round circle in a square box or the other way around, you have a lot of trouble. I think that's a big issue right now with blockchain.
You're talking about how distributed systems might impact the world. Where besides, obviously the number one application, people ask me, like with the internet, the killer app was email. That was the first thing that really revolutionized and made things useful. Well, the internet was email. For blockchain, the killer app has been so far Bitcoin, or at least cryptocurrencies more broadly. What do you think is the next low-hanging fruit in the blockchain technology? What comes after email in this sense?
Well, I think there are several low-hanging fruit that are being pursued now. One, curiously enough, I think is the art world, which is really leading the way in terms of blockchain and intellectual property. So right now, when an artist sells his or her work, they lose all possession of it. They have no ownership stake in it anymore for the most part. Blockchain allows artists to sell their work using smart contracts, which are algorithmic contracts on a blockchain that are basically run automatically. Humans don't have to be involved with them. To insist that when their work is resold by whoever buys it, whoever purchases it, that they receive say a 10% royalty on that, which I think is a great boon for artists and people who make intellectual property. Another thing is that in the art world, blockchain is being used very actively right now to track provenance of artworks. So theft and forgery is a gigantic problem in the art world. Some people say that 50% of artwork sold is fake. And so if the artist were to create a work and then register it on the blockchain, it becomes official and recorded, and every piece of data about transactions with that artwork, damage to that artwork, anything will be available instantly on blockchain. So insurers can look at that, museums can look at that, potential purchasers can look at that. I just think there's a tremendous technology. And in addition, there's a business called Dada.nyc that is using blockchain technology to provide universal basic income to artists who participate in their system. And it's very interesting. You go on and you draw and you share drawings with people around the world. And if you sell them, you get a percentage of the sale. The artists you've engaged with get a percentage, and then everyone else on the system also gets a percentage of your sale. So it's a new economic model, which I think is fascinating, and I think will be very influential on other economic models going forward.
That is very interesting, Stephen. Now, for people who are watching or listening to this, help explain how that actually works on a practical level. Let's say I'm a painter, or I'm a writer, and I have a work of art. Let's just stick with painting because that is easy. How do I then either make sure that I don't get forgeries? How does the blockchain help me prevent forgeries on a practical level? Like, what's step one? Okay, step one is I make the painting, I sign it. And then what's step two?
Okay, so if it's a physical painting, a traditional painting, you would take a photograph of that work, and there's a special type of photography that can be taken that will record the work in a very specific way. And you take that digital image of the work and you go to a website on the internet, enter that information, that digital image, and it will create a cryptographic code that represents that image at the point of creation. That cryptographic code is, a bunch of letters and numbers. You can't take that code and create the painting from it, but you can store that code on a blockchain. And then if someone 10 years down the road has a painting for sale, they say that it's your painting number one, right? The one that you registered on the blockchain. The new buyer can do the same cryptographic hash of that painting that they're being presented with. And if it is even slightly different, it will create a new code, and you'll know that it's a forgery. So the painting itself obviously is not stored electronically on the blockchain, but a code that represents the original edition of that painting is stored. So that's how you can do for almost any physical object. If it's a novel, you can just scan your first version of the novel through the cryptographic hash generator, and it will do the same thing. If it's a digital image, this is really very new and very interesting to me. Right now, anyone can cut and paste a digital image, print it out, put it on their wall, put it on their website. It happens all the time. But with blockchain, you can create what's called rare digital art. And when I first heard this term, it kind of blew me away because I just like, this is insane. This whole idea of rare digital art. But the more I work with it, and the more I also buy it sometimes, is so you create a digital image, and then you hash that and put it on a blockchain. It's attached to a token. that token contains the code and the information. So that image has more value than any copy of that image because it's the first image that was created. It's the original. And people really respect that and value that. There is a market for rare digital art.
And if people who don't believe that, you can tell them the case of CryptoKitties.
CryptoKitties were, I think these are these little funny cartoon cats that are created from one image, and you can buy accessories for them, and they can be bred with each other. And the value, I think last year they were so popular that they crashed the Ethereum blockchain, and the value of one kitty was, I think, around $100,000. There are also CryptoPunks that came before the CryptoKitties, and there's all kinds of things.
So let me just put that in perspective for people who are watching or listening to this. I mean, somebody paid $100,000 or more for a digital image of a kitty that was unique, that nobody could copy. But by the way, I remember reading some controversy that they actually don't even own it. Like the company that makes the CryptoKitties still somehow in the license agreement has ownership, and that these guys are basically just are the sole user or whatever of that image, something like that.
So yeah, that's very interesting. A great point, which is something I've been thinking about a lot. They own the code that shows that it's their kitty, but they don't own the software that translates that code into an image. So you're very right about that, and I find that to be a difficult concept. There's a good reason for it because that image might be made up of several different images. If you buy accessories for your cat, that's another image, and somebody needs to take care of that and track it. But you're buying the code. So if the company goes out of business, you might not ever be able to see that CryptoKitty again. But I'm not sure that in this new world, the code might be more important than the image. There's an artist named Kevin Abosh who sold the code for a photograph of a flower, a pretty regular standard photograph of a rose, I think, for $1 million. He never gave the person the image. He just gave them the hash.
Wow.
So, there's a lot going on with that. I recently bought, there's an artist named Eve Ensler, and she's a video artist, and Sussman, and I recently bought, she took the final copy of an art video she had made 20 years ago, and she turned it into things that she called atoms, into 3,000 different atoms. So the art video is broken up into little tiny bits of information. And I bought 3 of those for $120 a piece. And there are, 2,800 other people who own those. And if they want to show the entire video, they have to get permission from all of us to use our little cell of the movie. And they do that with smart contracts. I bought it as an investment, actually. I think that it will go up in value because it's an early entry into this type of art.
Wow.
But there's all kinds of stuff going on.
What fascinates me about you, Stephen, is that you've written a book about blockchain and yet you don't own any Bitcoin. It just seems so contradictory.
I've never been into cryptocurrency. I'm not that into playing with money. I like money as much as anyone else, but I'm not that into playing with money. But I do own Ether and Litecoin.
Okay.
Those two.
Okay, so why Ether and Litecoin? By the way, for those who are listening and don't know, these are 2 top 5, or maybe certainly top 10. Ether is number 2, and Litecoin is something around the 5th most popular cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm. So Ether, because I have a lot of faith in the people who are involved with the Ethereum blockchain, and also in a company called Consensus that just does a lot of interesting work with Ethereum. And because they were cheaper than Bitcoins too, I like to own whole coins rather than partial coins. And I didn't start looking into buying a cryptocurrency until the price of Bitcoin was quite high. And then so Ether, I just really think has a lot of potential. And it's also useful for buying art, and I'm interested in buying art, digital art, rare digital art, and other collectibles. And Litecoin I bought purely as a speculative thing because I liked the price and I thought it was going to go up. It did go up and then it went way, way down, and I bought more when it's way, way down because I think it will go back up. And I bought Ether recently also because I think it will go back up. I'm very tempted to buy Bitcoin right now. The more I've thought about the electricity issue, maybe I've talked myself into thinking that it's not as big a deal. But I do think it's going to go be a very valuable commodity in the future.
Right. Now, so one of the things that discouraged you from buying Bitcoin originally was simply the electricity usage. Was that one of it?
Yeah, I felt it was unethical. Everything I read about it, and I don't like to do things that I feel are unethical. So.
Right. I struggle with the same issue. And that's what I was telling you, is that I just didn't see how it was possible that it was consuming as much energy per transaction as they were saying. But if it were true, then it just seemed completely unsustainable. It just seemed like this is ludicrous. It just can't actually continue, and it will have to be changing. And by the way, Ethereum and I think Litecoin are also proof of work.
Yes.
And so they're both energy hogs as well. I mean, they consume less energy as a whole because they don't have the market capitalization and the huge network that Bitcoin has. But how did you jump over that ethical hurdle?
No, I realize that they both consume less, but it's the same hurdle I think we all face every day in our lives of less rather than more. It's hard to be perfect in this world. I mean, honestly, the U.S. dollar consumes a lot of electricity too.
Sure.
In this whole debate between crypto and the dollar, people seem to see the dollar as a benign force in the universe and something that, they don't. People talk about crypto being used by criminals. I mean, just look at who uses the U.S. dollar: criminals and thieves. And
right, but a lot of crypto enthusiasts also kind of reinforce the idea that the dollar is a relatively benign thing by calling their currencies stable coins based on the dollar.
Yeah, that's true, and that's a fairly new phenomenon, and one that I'm still thinking about. I can't quite decide what my position is on those stable coins. I mean, it's very interesting. The one Genesis that was started by the Winklevoss twins and other stable coins. I'm just not sure of their value, but I don't want to discount them.
Yeah, so for those who are scratching their head wondering what the hell we're talking about, the stable coins are, again, just like a cryptocurrency, but the only thing is that it's tied 1-to-1 to the U.S. dollar. So when the U.S. dollar goes up, the stable coin goes up, and when it goes down, it just mimics the trajectory of the dollar. And there's several. There's one called Tether, another one called USD Coin, another one the Genesis one that you or is it Gemini one? I forget. Sorry, Gemini one.
Yeah, Gemini. Yeah. Sorry.
But the idea is that implicitly in the idea is that the dollar is a stable currency, which of course in many respects it is, certainly compared to Venezuelan Bolivar or whatever. But but at one point it's almost guaranteed, given the monetary history, that the U.S. dollar will not necessarily collapse, but have a tremendous fluctuation. It's inevitable. It will happen. So suddenly those quote-unquote stable coins will be just as unstable as this wildly fluctuating dollar. And then all of a sudden people might flood to the quote-unquote unstable coins like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin.
Yeah, if that does happen, I think it's been quite a long time since the U.S. dollar was that volatile, as volatile as cryptocurrency. But yeah, we'll have to see. It does seem that right now in the current, like, we're in the age of institutions collapsing and changing before our eyes, and with very little explanation. I think that the current political situation in the U.S. is a giant shift that no one predicted and that took us by surprise. The loss of the music industry changing so dramatically, books changing dramatically, all kinds of huge corporations closing. It's a big shift, and I suppose that our currency that we think is so stable and secure could change dramatically too. I mean, I see it as a currency that's backed by Chinese debt, and who knows what will happen with that.
I'm going to try something, Stephen, now that I haven't tried before, and I hope it works technologically. If I lose you, it's going to be crazy. I'm going to share a screen right now for those who are watching on YouTube. And can you see it yourself, Stephen? Okay, great. So for those who are just listening to the podcast and can't see what we're looking at, it's a pretty straightforward table. On one axis, you see impact, so high impact to low impact. And then the other axis, you have feasibility, high feasibility, low feasibility. And this was done by McKinsey. And what they're trying to do is, it's under an article about trying to explain blockchain. They're looking at the different industries, about a dozen industries, and seeing where blockchain could have high impact or low impact, and how feasible and unfeasible it is to do. And I think it's useful for two reasons. Number one, it reminds people that blockchain is not all about cryptocurrencies, and that it's a far broader field, just like the internet is not just about email. And secondly, it opens up this discussion about, okay, besides cryptocurrencies or about currencies, what other industries could potentially be impacted by blockchain? So looking at this graph, Stephen, you're an expert. What do you see that you completely agree with and you're saying like, yep, they nailed it here? And then later I'll ask you where you disagree.
Can I start with what I disagree with?
Please.
So if I am reading the colors right, it has agriculture as lower than middle range impact.
Yeah.
Oh, agriculture is up there high. Okay.
I don't know. Hold on. Let me just. No. You're right. It's low. It's kind of medium impact and low and kind of relatively low feasibility.
So I think that's incorrect. I think that blockchain could have a huge impact in the agricultural industry around the world. I recently had a lunch with a guy, Reggie Haryu, who founded HaraChain in Indonesia. And he's using blockchain technology to give smallhold farmers a way to get the information about their land holdings and their agricultural production and their personal data to banks on the blockchain so they can get loans easily rather than going to local loan sharks. That's one way, and I think it's...
Hold on one second. Stephen, I just realized something, the way this particular... It's for those who are watching, this is a clickable table. And when I click on just agriculture, it does show low impact, medium impact, low feasibility. But when I actually click on here, on the agricultural, it says these are use cases. So here they say very high impact, which is food safety and origin. And then over here, agricultural supply chain, again, very high impact, medium feasibility. So, and let's say if I click on financial services, they have all sorts of different, so down here they have feasibility in the medium and low for micropayments, low impact. And then way off the charts here, high impact is trade and supply chain finance. So basically the way, and you have all these different initial coin offerings also. And what is this one here? Cross-border, they say it's high feasibility, high impact is cross-border person-to-person payments. Right. So basically...
I'd agree with all those.
Okay. So getting back to your agricultural example, what I don't really understand about this, the way McKinsey did this, is that the two examples are pretty high on impact, but when you click on the overall average, they put the whole industry as being kind of low, kind of medium impact. I don't know if you...
Okay, I guess they're looking at a broad range of factors to do with agriculture, but I think I would still disagree with that. I don't really see any area of agriculture that wouldn't benefit from that. But The people at McKinsey are pretty smart. So.
Yeah, they certainly can be. Yes.
Yeah.
And then let's click on arts and recreation. Let's see what we talked about here. Fine arts investment. They say the feasibility is kind of medium to low, and impact medium. Art provenance. Sorry, medium feasibility, kind of slightly low impact. So, and then gambling and prediction markets at the lowest end for the arts and recreation.
I think they're way off base on all three.
Okay. Got it.
And I say that because I've written about this a few articles recently, and also in my book. And there's a lot going on, and Christie's auction house is involved with it. Their museums are very interested in it. I think that in the art world is going to be profoundly affected by blockchain.
What about this whole idea of the government and having, property title and that kind of stuff? Let's click on property here. And here they say land registry would be high feasibility and pretty high impact. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And I think that could be fantastic in the developing world.
Yes. And
in corrupt countries, I guess Honduras fits in both those categories. And there's an experiment undergoing there right now.
I just came back from
investing.
I just came back from 5.5 years in Africa, and there I could see how land title is huge. There's an epidemic of people selling land that they don't actually own, that they don't actually have the title to, and you give them the money. And here's a real funny story. They have lots of places, especially I saw this in Ghana a lot, in Nigeria, where people would spray paint on their property, not for sale. In America, you drive around, you see for sale signs. In Ghana and Nigeria, I would see not for sale signs, because what happens...
So that people would know.
Yeah, so that if somebody takes you, hey, I got this property to sell you, I got this plot of land or this whatever, this house, and people, the potential buyer will see clearly, okay, you're not the owner of this property, and I'm not going to get a fake sale. But anyway, one way. So explain on a practical level how this could work with title, land registry. Would the government own the blockchain? Would it be their own, or would it be kind of a public ledger that everybody would be able to add on to?
Well, it could be either way, but my guess is that most of these would be government run or run by nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because what you don't want to do is burden the small landholder in the developing world with the need to get heavily involved in the technology. You want to make it easy and straightforward for people to register their land. And to do that, the chain would have to be decentralized at best, or centralized, with an authority who can certify that the land is theirs and also maintain the technology. Mm. At least for now.
Now, you talked about art as being one of the industries that could be impacted by blockchain in a very positive and impactful way.
Right.
And obviously cryptocurrencies and that whole thing. Is there one or two other sectors that you think are things to watch?
Yeah, I think that I'm just looking at the list. Mm-hmm. A lot of people talk about media and technology being impacted. I tend to think that that's slow and not really going to happen.
Why is that?
So quickly, although there are different, they just had the Internet of Things in that, and that's definitely has great potential. I can talk about that for a second. Blockchain using smart contracts could have a huge impact on the Internet of Things, and that Internet of Things means connecting devices, electric vehicles, or any kind of machine to the internet, and so hoping that those machines would communicate information with each other and with humans that could make systems run much more easily. For instance, if you had a solar array on your roof and you were selling electricity to a power authority, you could have a smart contract, an algorithmically run contract that would read how much electricity you put onto the grid and pay you automatically. And that's really useful because a lot of those payments would be very small. There would be millions of them. And right now, the systems in place aren't really capable of handling that. Fraud prevention would be a big thing. There are ways that you can implant. If this is fraudulent physical objects, there are ways that you can implant seeds or devices or fingerprints onto objects and track those through the blockchain, and someone could always know if something was fake or real.
So there's quite a few, but you think overall that the technology field paradoxically might not be as low-hanging fruit as everybody thinks, even though blockchain is obviously a technology, and you would think that they would be an early adopter.
Yeah, I was thinking for media, it's not
okay.
Low-hanging fruit.
Got it.
Because the idea there is that people will produce content just like what you're producing today, and that other people will pay them for it through micropayments, through blockchain technology. And right now, I feel like the user interface is too complicated for all of the projects I've seen, and the only ones who get involved are truly dedicated enthusiasts.
What other ones on this list that you would say?
I think insurance is huge for keeping track of claims, and I guess they agree.
Yeah.
And payouts, yeah.
They mentioned,
and the insurance companies are leading the way for sure in blockchain use cases.
By the way, I don't know if you followed this particular cryptocurrency. I think it's called Myota. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
They're claiming to be helping the Internet of Things with their, and also they have a different type of algorithm. They don't use proof of work in the traditional way. In other words, they ask every person who does a transaction on their system to do 2 other transactions before theirs gets done. So in other words, they've basically outsourced the work not to specific miners, but to basically all the users of the network. And so they claim that could give them infinite scalability effectively, because the more people use it, the more people are doing the work necessary to keep up the blockchain to make it feasible.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's of course skeptics of this whole idea, but their whole claim to fame is that they think that there should be enormous throughput, enormous scalability, and the only way to do that is to kind of offload that work to the people who are actually using it, so that you have to do two transactions and do the computation of 2 transactions for your 1 transaction. So it's an interesting theory, but for whatever reason, I by the way, full disclosure, I invested a little bit into their currency, but I'm kind of skeptical myself whether it will actually take off. But these are all.
Well, I think there's this big divide between blockchain purists who want it to be just a distributed system that's totally controlled by the people or nodes on the chain, and then others who want to see distributed ledger technology, of which blockchain is a part, develop and evolve and take on other aspects. And I think that we have to be flexible and open-minded going forward.
Right. Why should somebody buy your book?
First of all, because it's really entertaining, and believe it or not, a book about technology is really entertaining, and it takes you into a world that you probably don't know exists, which is the blockchain culture. And second of all, because you want to learn about blockchain without being intimidated or frightened away by technological talk.
Yeah, I think you definitely succeeded big time in doing that. The book is very readable. I got an early copy of it from your publisher, and it was super easy to read, and somebody who's technophobe or can pick it up and understand. You toward the end of the book, I want to close on a couple of things toward the end of the book. You talk about dApps. Can you explain a little bit about what dApps are? We talked about CryptoKitties, which is, I suppose, a dApp.
Yeah. Well, dApps are the key to the blockchain use cases. So blockchain should be seen as a foundational technology that you might not even notice going forward, because what makes it usable and realistic in people's lives are applications. They're just like the applications that you use on the World Wide Web, like Spotify or Netflix or all these things. But they're called dApps because they're distributed applications. They're done on a blockchain. So these dApps are what make the world go round, what make it easy to use. They're translators of the technology so that you can have fun with them. Basically, it's how you're going to use blockchain technology in the future.
But a lot of people are criticizing dApps at this point, Stephen. They're saying for all the hype, frankly, there's very, very few users of them. Cryptocurrency is one of the only cases that came up and it was really a boom and a bust thing. It's not really a big thing anymore in 2019. And so people are saying, yeah, there's a ton of dApps being created on the EOS blockchain. There's, of course, Ethereum is the leader in having the most amount of dApps. But so the dApps are proliferating. You've got stuff trying to imitate Uber, trying to imitate Airbnb, trying to imitate all sorts of existing apps that are all centralized today. But the bottom line is none of them are getting much traction out there. And so...
Yeah, you can go to a website called State of dApps and you can see it's actually shocking how few people are using these dApps.
Thank you.
So my feeling about that, I mean, it shocked me when I went on that. My feeling about that is that we're at the engineering stage of the blockchain, where it's run by engineers and developers. And if you look at the help wanted for all these companies, all they hire are engineers and developers. But they need to hire imaginative people and creators and thinkers who are going to make the experience of using these dApps and using the blockchain exciting and easy and fun for people. And I really feel that is not happening. I think it will happen. But these things are hard to use. Very hard to use. I told you I bought those pieces of a film called Atoms the other day, and then I went to find them, and I had lost them. They had disappeared because I had restarted my MetaMask thing, and it turns out I had an old MetaMask thing from a year ago, and blah, blah, blah. And it took me like 2 hours to figure it out, and I have a lot of experience with this. And so I could imagine, my stepmother or someone trying to do that, and it would drive them insane, and they would throw their computer across the room. So that has to change, or these dApps will never take off. And also, they have to be useful, really useful.
And I think they also have to be better in some ways than the existing centralized apps. So in other words, if somebody wants to beat Uber in its game, well, you got to be better than Uber. You got to give somebody a reason to say, okay, I'm not going to use my Uber app on my phone. I'm going to go to my dApp on my phone, I suppose, and then use that
better
instead.
Or cheaper. If they're cheaper, that will be good.
But if it's cheaper, it has to be at least as roughly as good. It can't, or it's got to be if it's going to be worse, it's got to be way cheaper. In other words, it's got to be value.
Yeah. Right.
And so,
I totally agree, and that does give me pause. The state of the dApps. I'm not convinced that this is the next internet, but I really hope it is. I really hope that this succeeds. I think the potential is fantastic.
Right. And so in your hunt for unicorns, we're still hunting?
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but who knows? I think it's coming.
Let's end on a positive note about the self-sovereign world that we may be entering into. Explain a little bit about what you mean by that.
That to me is so exciting, and also I think something that will sort of will lift all boats if this takes off, and that is if right now we depend on our identity. Our identity has to be affirmed by all these on the internet, by all these organizations that we join, like Facebook, Google, eBay, all these things. And what we do is in return for being identified by these people, we give them access to our data, right? They come in, we're like crops in the field, and they come in and wipe the crops clean as soon as they grow, wait for them to come back and wipe them clean again. So with blockchain technology, we could each have something called a sovereign identity, And so could all the billion people in the world who have no ID at all right now. And this sovereign identity would include an affirmation of our names, our existence, our birth date, any data that we wanted to keep on the chain, including health data, legal data, whatever. But we would control who got to see what. And we could sell that data. If Amazon wanted data on us, we could sell it to them rather than giving it to them. If my daughter went to buy beer at the convenience store, she could just show a piece of data that said this person is over 21 years old rather than a driver's license that reveals where she lives and all of this information. I think that is going to it's going to levelize the playing field. It's going to take away a lot of the authority of the organizations that now control us, including governments and big corporations. I just think it's going to be a game changer. And there are dApps, that you can go to establish a sovereign identity now, like Uport, but they're all very difficult to use still.
Yeah, that's the big conundrum that they've got to solve, is making this useful and valuable. And I think I'm bullish like you are. A lot of people think, but I think also you're not hyperbolic. In other words, you're not, if you read your book, The Blockchain, it's not like you're promising nirvana and peace on earth. You realize that this is going to be a struggle, and it's not going to be even. And I think that your book is very lucid in helping people understand the technology. And I think in this conversation, we lost probably some people as far as like scratching their heads. And if you're one of those persons scratching your head, not understanding what we're saying, I think you're a perfect candidate for Stephen Williams's book because you break things down. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm not an idiot on blockchain. And so I asking you some questions that are a little bit less basic. But your book covers everything from the basic to the advanced. And so I think it really could help the person who's a novice and who wants to know a little bit more about this technology. Where can people get Blockchain, the Next Everything? I imagine Amazon?
Yeah, you can buy it at local bookstores or Amazon. Mm-hmm. And if you want to check out more information, you can go to stephenpwilliams.com. It's STEPHEN, or I'm on Twitter at Stephen Williams. And I'm also happy to answer any questions if you want to contact me through Twitter or the website. Happy to help. Well, it is hard to understand, and I sympathize with people because I've been through it myself.
Yeah, and it's definitely it takes a while, but I'm just warning anybody who's listening to this podcast and saying it is a rabbit hole that you could go down to, and you could be losing months of your life.
It's an addiction, yeah. That's really something.
We're going to do a Blockchain Anonymous rabbit hole. People.
Yeah, that's my next project.
Exactly. Getting over it. And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel technology and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on the latest episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. Here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and want to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ yep, you guessed it, ftapon. That's where you can pick up some sweet rewards for as little as $1 a month. And remember, subscribing to the WanderLearn podcast helps, but downloading each episode helps even more. Please share the podcast, review it, and sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. This show was edited by Rejoice Tapon. The music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.